Samuel Leblanc had always been a discreet man. At 68 years old, he carried on his shoulders the traces of a busy life, but marked by simplicity. His hair had turned grey, almost silver, and was often neatly combed back, although a few unruly strands betrayed his advanced age. His back, slightly hunched, told of the years of hard work, manual labor and efforts to keep his family afloat. But these traces of time were only the appearance. There was a quiet strength in him, a wisdom built through trials, and a rare clarity of mind that did not fade with the years. His hands, worn by working the earth, by leather and metal, were never without a certain refinement. They bore scars that told stories of repair, building, and sacrifice. If some took these marks for wear and tear, Samuel saw them as symbols of resilience. His life had not been easy. The son of immigrants, he grew up in a small house on the outskirts of the city, where money was tight but love and respect were never lacking. From a young age, he had learned to work hard, to observe, and above all, to be discreet. His father, an upright and dignified man, had instilled in him the values of hard work and self-respect, even when society around him often seemed to want to sweep them away. And Samuel, over the years, had grown in this discretion, building a small empire for himself, far from outside eyes, far from ostentation. But Samuel had not sought money. He was not interested in fame or acclaim. What interested him was independence, respect, and above all, justice. He was not a man of many words, but a man of great action. Every decision he made was measured, every movement considered. He was a strategist. This is how he built up a small network of solid investments, which he was able to make profitable, while keeping a low profile. Those who knew him, even vaguely, had always perceived him as an ordinary, unpretentious man. But beneath this banal appearance hid one of the most influential men in the automotive sector. He was not interested in the limelight, but he knew he could act in the shadows, with an invisible but firm hand. That morning, on a mild and pleasant spring morning, Samuel was driving to a luxury car dealership downtown. It was a place where luxury was king, where sophistication was on every street corner, and where cars shone under bright neon lights. The prices there were astronomical, often as high as the arrogance of the employees who worked there. Samuel was not the type to frequent this type of place. It wasn't his world. But there was one car that had always made him dream. An old Jaguar, a rare model, a gem that he had seen in magazines when he was young, a teenage dream come true. Samuel had saved for years for this precise moment, for this car that he intended to buy, not for the pleasure of wealth, but for the symbolism that it represented for him. It was a way to celebrate his life, his struggles, and his success. However, he wasn't just there to buy a car. This trip had a much deeper purpose. Samuel knew this dealership was just a starting point. He was there for something he had carefully planned, a slow, deliberate revenge. And he knew that it would be here, in this place, that he would face his enemy. When he entered the showroom, he immediately felt the seller's eyes on him. He didn't even need to look at them to know what they were thinking. An old gentleman, probably without much money, probably there just to watch. Judgments were written on their faces. Their disdain, their polite smiles, and their absent-minded gestures spoke volumes. Samuel was not affected by it. He was used to hasty judgments. He had endured them all his life. People often underestimated others based on their appearance, and that was precisely why he had chosen this moment to act. He calmly approached a salesman, an arrogant young man named Damien, who was at the front desk. Damien didn't seem at all interested in Samuel. He looked up from his cell phone, scanned it, and looked it up and down before responding casually.
Hello, my name is Samuel Leblanc.
I've come to see this Jaguar, he said, with a discreet smile that was neither too confident nor too shy. Just enough to indicate that this was not the first time he had entered a luxury place, but also humble enough not to provoke. Damien raised an eyebrow, still absorbed in his phone, and gestured dismissively. This car? It's a high-end model, sir. You know, we're talking tens of thousands of dollars. Are you sure you can afford that, sir? The way he pronounced, sir, was a little too clear, a little too pronounced. It was the accent of a confident young man, who already judged that an older man could never be a serious customer. Samuel felt this arrogance right away, but he didn't let it show. He replied in a calm voice, without any apparent emotion. "I know what I want. I'm here for this Jaguar." Damien sighed loudly, a theatrical gesture that did not fail to betray his growing irritation. His eyes rolled exaggeratedly, and he turned on his heel, his footsteps echoing in the silence of the exhibition hall. Samuel, for his part, remained motionless, almost invisible in the crowd of younger, more flamboyant customers. Damien walked towards another salesman, even younger, with whom he exchanged a few discreet whispers. There was no doubt that their conversation was about him, about this man they probably considered a passing customer, an old man whose presence was simply a formality. The look that Damien gave Samuel before leaving was marked by this youthful arrogance that he displayed every day, a sort of natural contempt towards those he considered out of his world. But Samuel, true to his nature, did not let himself be disturbed. Far from being affected, he settled more comfortably into his role of silent observer, an invisible witness to the scene that was playing out. He wasn't there to make friends or demand an immediate apology. He knew his moment would come, and that moment would be decisive. Rather than allowing himself to be overcome by the frustration or humiliation that others would have felt, Samuel chose to remain calm, maintain his composure and play his game with impeccable mastery. He observed the other customers, attentive to the slightest gestures, to the words exchanged between the employees. Far from looking at these interactions with a feeling of rejection, he analyzed them, learned from them. He didn't just see a salesman chatting with a customer. He saw a balance of power, a dynamic to be exploited. And above all, he paid attention to the general attitude of the company, to the spirit that reigned in this place. Because it was this mind that he was going to change. In his eyes, buying the Jaguar was just a pretext, an excuse for a much more significant act. A few minutes passed before another salesman approached him, an older man, whose face bore the signs of a professional life spent understanding the value of people, rather than judging their appearance. Samuel instantly felt that this was a different man. He didn't need to speak to know that he recognized the discomfort in the air, Damien's inappropriate attitude. "Sir, I would like to sincerely apologize for my colleague's behavior," the salesman said in a respectful, almost solemn voice. "If you allow, I can offer you a private tour of the Jaguar you desire, without any pressure or distraction." Samuel observed this man with a measured look, weighing his words, evaluating his integrity. He knew he could accept this offer, that he would be treated well by this more respectful salesman, but he had no intention of being guided like an ordinary customer.
No, thank you.
"I'll take care of that myself," he replied in a calm but firm tone. This response was not just a formality, she was a message. He didn't need anyone's help. He had enough steel in his veins to handle this business alone. He had no intention of submitting to the implicit rules of customer service. It was he, Samuel LeBlanc, who would dictate the rules of the game. Without another word, he took out his phone with impressive calmness. Within seconds, he punched in a few numbers, tapping on the screen with a confidence that bespoke familiarity with the technology. Far from the image of the old-fashioned old man that the sellers had in mind, Samuel was in reality a titan hidden in the mist of his modesty. Within moments, a well-written email went out, addressed directly to those who did not yet understand who they were dealing with. Damien, along with the rest of the staff, had no idea that the man they thought was an insignificant old gentleman was, in reality, one of the most influential shareholders of the company that owned this dealership. Samuel had always kept a low profile, preferring to observe and judge rather than get involved in daily management. But that morning, things would change. He had waited a long time for this precise moment, an act of justice that he had patiently matured. Barely an hour later, a message arrived on the phone of the dealership manager, Mr. DuPont. It contained a clear and concise instruction: urgent meeting. The message, direct and unequivocal, left no room for negotiation. Mr. DuPont, a man already nervous at base, immediately rushed to Samuel's office, where the latter was calmly waiting for him. The scene was perfect. the director, confused and about to learn a truth that would destabilize him, and Samuel, sitting there with the serenity of a man who knows that destiny has already played its card. When Mr. Dupont arrived in the office, he seemed as lost as a trapped child. Samuel looked up and gave him an almost fatherly smile. "I'm glad you came so quickly," he said, his voice soft but full of innuendo. "I would like to talk to you about the attitude of your employees." The director, fully aware of the gravity of the situation, bowed slightly, seeking to preserve what remained of his apparent authority. "I'm really sorry, Mr. LeBlanc," he began, visibly unsettled. "This is not at all representative of our service. We will resolve this immediately." But behind this attempt at conciliation, Mr. Dupont's tone betrayed nervousness, a man caught in the grip of his own errors. He knew that what was at stake here was not simply a question of salesmanship. It was much bigger. It was a clash between two worlds, and Samuel LeBlanc had just entered the room, a silent but implacable actor. Samuel shook his head slowly, an imperceptible movement, but full of meaning. "No," he said in a calm but firm voice. "This is not a simple service issue. It's a respect issue." He let his words hang in the air for a moment, scrutinizing the headmaster with an intensity that seemed to penetrate the troubled man's soul. "You have a salesperson, an employee in your establishment, who doesn't understand that every customer deserves to be treated with dignity, regardless of appearance, age, or status. And that's a much deeper problem than simple professional misconduct. It touches on the core values of your company." The director, visibly overwhelmed, looked down. Samuel didn't need to say more, but he knew that the hour of revelation had come. Before Dupont could even find the words to respond, Samuel sat up slightly in his seat, the calm authority in his posture becoming palpable. "I just bought this company. All of your employees, including Damien, are laid off as of this moment." The declaration sounded like a clap of thunder, a shock wave that made the director reel. "You will understand that in a company I own, we treat everyone with respect, without exception." The coldness of his voice admitted no discussion, no compromise. The silence that followed was heavy, almost suffocating. The director didn't know whether to protest, plead, or simply submit to this implacable decision. He tried to find the words, but they stuck in his throat, and he lowered his head, unable to say anything.
Mr. LeBlanc.
He left his sentence hanging, his gaze shifting. He had never imagined that such a turnaround was possible. "I don't know what to say," he murmured, in an attempt to regain a dignity he already knew he had lost. Samuel, however, showed no weakness. He was master of the game, the player who controlled the cards, and his eyes shone with implacable resolve. "You don't have to say anything," he said, his voice impassive. "You will take care of the transition, but know that this kind of attitude, this lack of respect, will no longer be tolerated here." Each word seemed etched in the air, ringing with the certainty of a verdict delivered after years of patience. Samuel had not only reacted to a simple insult towards him, he had overturned a system, redefined a space where malice, arrogance, and contempt would no longer be tolerated. The director felt like a scolded child, guilty of having neglected the basic principles of service. However, he knew that nothing was going to erase the reality of the situation. He was facing a man whose decision was irrevocable. Samuel LeBlanc had just changed the rules of the game, in a way he could never have anticipated. It didn't take long for the rest of the staff to be informed of the decision. Damien, the arrogant salesman who had started the whole debacle, didn't even have time to protest before he was told he was being fired immediately. He was speechless, unable to comprehend what had just happened. His colleagues, who until then had observed him from afar, suddenly found themselves faced with a reality that they had not considered. The way others looked at them changed in an instant. Murmurs arose among the employees, somewhere between astonishment and incomprehension. They did not know if they were witnessing simple revenge or a reform that would disrupt their daily lives. But what they didn't know was that Samuel had already anticipated every possible reaction. He had not come to this dealership to repair minor wrongdoings, but to re-establish a moral order that he considered lost. As for Samuel, he rose from his seat without another word, his gait calm, controlled, almost too ordinary for the scene he had just created. Without a backward glance, he headed for the door, leaving a trail of confusion and respect behind him. The Jaguar he had reserved was waiting for him, but he knew that was only a side issue. The essential had been accomplished. But the surprise didn't stop there. The next day, an announcement appeared in the business newspapers. Samuel Leblanc, a name previously reserved for private and discreet circles, was now the figurehead of a series of company takeovers. The title was explicit: Samuel Leblanc, a discreet and respected investor, becomes the owner of a chain of car dealerships across the country. In the columns, we explained how the radical decision to lay off the entire dealership staff was only the first step in a profound transformation. This acquisition marked the beginning of a new era where respect, fairness, and equality would be at the heart of business practices. The bad actions of certain employees had led to their downfall, and Samuel counted on a more respectful, more professional staff to support him in building a solid and ethical empire. The message was clear. Samuel Leblanc was not just another car buyer or businessman. He was a visionary who, with cold determination, ended an era of injustice and arrogance. In one day, he not only acquired the car of his dreams, but he also taught a lesson in respect and humility to those who believed that appearance could ever determine a person's worth. He made it clear that true greatness lies in human dignity, and that nothing, neither age, nor appearance, nor even apparent wealth, could eclipse the integrity and intrinsic value of each individual. This was not simply an act of power. It was a statement, a clear message that there was no room for contempt in the world Samuel wanted to build. A world where respect for others, recognition of their value, was the norm. A world that would make no room for those who thought they could dominate others based on superficial judgments. And all this, Samuel knew, was only the beginning.